It's a beautiful, sunny, crisp November morning, and so welcome this Thursday morning once again to our oratory here at Bishop Eton, where I'd like to share a short message with you because this Sunday, of course, we begin the season of Advent and start preparing for Christmas. Indeed, the whole world seems to be thinking about nothing but how we're going to cope with Christmas this year, and it's going to be a real challenge again, as this whole process has been, but I'm sure we'll manage. And one of the things that has occurred to me is that perhaps this Christmas we're being offered a special opportunity. In other words, in the past there's always the temptation that we have so many, and they're lovely, wonderful celebrations, carol services, pageants, nativity plays with the children and so on. But there is the danger that we get to Christmas itself and we're almost exhausted with it. And this year, well, we can't have all those special celebrations. I'm sure the children will be doing something in school, and I hope to contribute to that because next Monday I'm going to start recording for the children. And you know, when we began this pandemic problem, and I suggested that every home have a sacred space, if possible, where you can gather for prayer of an evening at 7 o'clock. And I know many of you have been very faithful to that. And if you've slipped a bit, well, here's another chance to start again. And one of the things I want to say to the children is, if you have this sacred space, and if you haven't, let's get one, and let's make sure that we're ready with a beautiful crib. Some of you, again, at home may already have beautiful cribs, but I and my sister will have this abiding memory of when we were very young, my father deciding to make his own crib, and it held pride of place at Christmas every year in our home, and I still have it. Indeed, I've shown it to some of the children in the schools over the years, and I intend to just talk them through preparing the crib for Christmas, so that we build up with Mary and Joseph and the shepherds and then finally the kings. And over the 3 weeks or 3.5 weeks as we're preparing for the great day, which will be 4 weeks tomorrow, Christmas Day itself, that our crib is ready to receive the bambino, the baby Jesus, on Christmas night. So let's see if we can all spend this Advent time. It's not a season of penance in the way that Lent is, but it is a time when we try to give ourselves space, and it's a time of waiting and expectation, so that we build up that sense of expectation and hope, which the world so badly needs, as we know at the moment. So that's the broader project. And then as a parish, well, next week it seems, I haven't had any official guidance from the Archdiocese yet, but I'm sure that will come, that we will be able to go back to celebrating the Eucharist in our churches. And I suggest we go back to the timetable we had prior to the lockdown. Now, my suggestion is that next week we simply stay with the quiet times, quiet prayer times, and we begin on the second Sunday of Advent. We'll go back to having masses that day, all things being equal, rather than break next week up. So we'll have the same times for private prayer next week as we've had, and go back to celebrating the Eucharist on the second Sunday of Advent. That's my proposal. It could change if there's a lot of disagreement, or if people kind of feel that they want something different, but that would be my suggestion. Keep it simple. We'll go back to Mass and then work up to Christmas. And again, over Christmas, I have a number of ideas of what we might be able to do. I think it's going to be a huge challenge. I mean, normally we have 9 masses to celebrate Christmas, 2 early masses in each parish for families, the midnight masses, and then the usual Sunday morning timetable on Christmas Day. Clearly that's not going to be possible. We're going to have to look at how we manage it, and I have got some bright ideas, and I'll just sow this seed with you. Again, the temptation is, across the world, I suspect now, the way things are, that we celebrate Christmas Day, maybe Boxing Day, and then it's all over. Well, actually, there are the 12 days of Christmas the Church is telling us to celebrate, right through the Christmas season, up to the coming of the wise men on the Feast of the Epiphany on the 6th of February. So we've actually got those 12 days after Christmas, and I want to make something of those this year. So let's make something of Advent, and let's make something of the Christmas season this year. And I'll explain more about that next week once my ideas are clarified and once I've talked it through with a few more people. Now, in the meantime, there are a couple of things I would like to share with you. As you know, we do have a number of priests here who are in need of quite a bit of support. We've been negotiating very hard with the social services who've been wonderfully supportive. I think we've now been offered if my mathematics are correct, 31 and a half hours of personal assistance for 4 of the community. Our difficulty is actually finding the people who would be able to do this. Obviously, it would be good if people have experience of this care sector. We have had a conversation with 1 or 2 people, but it seems to me now with those sort of hours, funded by the social services, I need to add, that we could have a job share of 2 people doing about 16 hours a week. So I want to throw it out again. I realise that maybe those of you listening, it's not something you'd be able to do, many of you, most of you. But I do feel in our 2 parishes there must be people who know where we can advertise to find these people who could join our wonderful team who come in the mornings on the weekdays, Monday to Friday, and one of the Lynns also comes in on Sunday, so we do have somebody over the weekend, and of course our wonderful girl Christine is in 6 days a week and then over the weekend. So we do have a lot of help, but we have been granted this extra help and we would like to get it. So if you can help me here, at least let me know where we should advertise. Our nurse who comes in also for 10 hours a week, Philip Sargent, he works for the Archdiocese as well. He and I are working on this and he will be finding the people for us and doing the interviewing once we get the applications. So please, if you can help, that would be great. And one of the other things, 1 or 2 people have lent me books over the past 2 or 3 years actually, and I hate the idea of hanging on to books that don't really belong to me. I remember when I was talking about Pierre Teilhard de Chardin, the great French Jesuit, and I quoted a passage and I said, you know, nobody's ever told me where this is from or been able to, and somebody did. I got the book. It was from his letters during the war, and he was writing to his cousin. I think his cousin was called Marguerite, if I remember correctly. And it's in there, and they actually signed it for me. There was this wonderful passage. I'm just going to share another little bit of it with you because I was rereading it again yesterday, actually during the prayer time before the Blessed Sacrament. And I thought, gosh, this is so powerful. And it's a message I needed to hear again myself, and perhaps will be helpful for you too. He says, writing to her, she was obviously anxious about many things. She was involved in education. I think she was a principal of a college somewhere, from what I could gather, eventually anyway. He says, about your own personal concerns, listen once more while I repeat what is one of my firmest convictions as your cousin and as a priest. Don't worry about whether your life is worthwhile, about its anomalies, its disappointments, its somewhat obscure and somber future. You are doing what God wills. In the midst of your anxieties and dissatisfactions, you are offering him the sacrifice of a humbled soul, bowing, in spite of everything, to an austere providence. You are deprived even of the joy of feeling that you are resigned, that you accept, that you love, and yet at the same time you want to be resigned to show that you are faithful. Don't be afraid. All this toil is set to your credit, and it is a magnificent use of your time. And so he goes on, wonderfully reassuring. So if you are struggling a bit, just take that message to heart. Recognize that you are a child of God, that he does love you, in spite of all the mistakes and problems that arise, and even the sins that we commit. Here is this wonderfully consoling and compassionate Jesuit priest reminding us of the compassionate God who came among us in Jesus of Nazareth, whose coming we are about to celebrate. So let's rejoice at that. And lastly, we've remembered lots of intentions recently. And goodness me, can you believe it? My sister had to remind me last night that it was actually my mother's anniversary yesterday. So I did reassure her that I would be united with her in prayer. And I will find an opportunity again around this time to celebrate Mass in memory of my mum and to pray for the repose of her soul, as we do for all your loved ones whom you ask us to pray for. And as you know, the intentions are built up here and so on. But my sister, she's a great one for Facebook, and she put a lovely photograph, which actually I've got here, but she's got a copy of too, of my mother holding her when she was a little child. It's a very beautiful photograph. And it touched my heart again yesterday. And it reminded me of the day my mum died, the 25th of November 2002, both my sister and I. And indeed, my nephew, who died earlier this year, we were all with her when she died. It was a very precious moment, and I have shared this with one or two people before, because I'm always looking for connections, as you know, and I think these are signs of God's providence. And extraordinarily, 3 days before she died, on the 22nd of November, I'd gone up to London because I knew she was deteriorating, and I was staying in our house in Clapham for a few days because I hadn't had much holiday that year, funnily enough, so I felt able to do so. I was working at the time at the Publications House in Hampshire. But I'd taken the morning off, and the weather was horrendous, and I'd taken refuge in a church I'd never been in before, just near where the BBC headquarters are, All Souls Langham Place. And I was in there while the rain was pouring down, just quietly reflecting and praying. And I got a phone call from the sisters at the Little Sisters of the Poor, where my mum was, and where my sister is now, funnily enough, to say, "You'd better come." And I went, and it was only a couple of weeks after the funeral, when I was going through my mum's effects, I discovered that my mum was actually baptised in that church, which I'd never been in before. She was baptised as an Anglican at the age of 18. And the more remarkable bit of the story is this, that a week or so later, I don't know why, because this doesn't usually happen to me, something kept saying to me, "You never looked at the date." Do you know, I went back and looked at the date of my mum's baptism, and it was actually the 22nd of November, when she was an 18-year-old in 1931. So there I was, all those years later, in the same church, on the same day. She was, in those days, conditionally rebaptised when she became a Catholic, before her marriage to my dad. But of course, we don't do that now. We recognise that her true baptism was that baptism in All Souls Langham Place. So I love to share that story, and I hope you can see connections as we now prepare for the great season of Advent and to celebrate Christmas as well as we possibly can as our two parishes and anybody else who wants to join us. Meanwhile, may the Lord bless you, your homes and families, and strengthen and fill you with the peace that we're always begging the Lord will give us, a peace that only he can give. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen.